Hi, and welcome to Contracts Over Coffee, the podcast where we talk about all things contracting while sipping a delicious coffee beverage. I'm your host, Ann Baker, Senior Director of Partner Marketing at Icertis, and with me today is Dom Burch, Vice President of Marketing for our partner Syke, a legal technology consultancy firm. Welcome to the program today, Dom.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
I
Great to
should
have you
say
here.
I should say cheers.
Cheers. That's right. Cheers. Cheers. I should point out that today we are doing a very special edition of Contracts Over Coffee. It is a healthcare edition of it because this will be first broadcast at Icertis Healthcare Day. That's a half-day virtual summit where our partners, like Syke, are joining us to talk about and reimagine kind of the future of healthcare together. And so while we'll still talk about all of the typical contracting topics, we may delve into healthcare in a little more detail today than usual. So I like to start off this program with the same question for all our guests. Dom, what is your story?
What is my story? I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't train in law, and I'm not actually that techie either, which is quite ironic. So I work in a legal tech consultancy, um, but I have been on the other side. I've worked for big companies like Walmart over here in the UK, and I've been the business user that probably didn't really get on with legal very well because I was one of those people that perhaps didn't get around to signing my contracts, maybe didn't even have a contract in place. And so the legal team always felt like they were the ones who slowed things down. They kind of got in the way. But fast forward to about 18 months ago, and I hooked up with our founder and CEO, Alistair, who's also from Walmart days. So we knew each other back then. And it's been really exciting actually going on the journey with Syke and actually understanding the contracting and all of those things I used to think were quite difficult and slow and a bit dull. Actually, now with technology is really, helping companies leverage and helping companies really move faster actually and do business better. So I've learned an awful lot in my time at Syke, but also I think what's quite exciting is it's quite straightforward when you get under the hood. It's actually a lot of it's common sense. So that's my story really. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a techie, but proud to be part of Syke and part of its journey.
Yeah, that's great. I know it is really interesting just how pervasive contracts are in all of our companies, but only recently have we really started looking at the whole process and seeing how we can overhaul it. And there's just a lot of opportunity there. So when you get into it, it does get pretty exciting because you can really help a lot of companies, I think, really change the way they're doing business, their contracting. So with that being said, what do you think is the biggest challenge with contracting today, particularly for healthcare too?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sort of think of contracting in probably four or five ways. I mean, one of the things is actually having everything in one place, so better contract management. There's nothing worse than knowing you've got an agreement, but you can't place your hands on it, or somebody leaves the business and you don't know where they left things behind. So we see that as being really, really important, and although it's kind of getting to first base and it's common sense, it's amazing how many organizations, if they're honest, and if you ask them that question, could you at the touch of a button grab every agreement? And are you able to tell which of those agreements are coming to an end, where there's a renewal coming along, what your rights and obligations are, and even to the point of knowing, and maybe we can touch on this later, what's the value of the contract, right? What are you due to receive and how much should you pay and all those things. And sometimes those things can get misplaced or lost, or you just carry on working with people over years and things roll over and never change. I think that's key. I think the other thing is that being able to actually extract information and data so that it becomes actionable insight. So, it's one thing having all of your contracts in a repository and safely stored and neatly labeled and easy to locate, but actually having metadata and, things that are hidden beneath, if you like, the data that sits within those agreements and those contracts, being able to extract that and use that in a meaningful way. So not just in terms of reporting, but also in terms of actually drilling right down and using that so it strategically supports the company, right? Because the legal function or the contracting functions are effectively helping the commerce of that company, helping the company achieve its strategic aims, and being able to drill out and extract insight is really, really powerful. And of course, these things then become self-fulfilling, because sometimes the hurdle for people to put some of this technology in place is the cost or the change program or the IT requirements. But of course, once you start to see some of those gains, then you can really see a return on your investment. But also, once you've got it, you can't quite remember what it was like not having it. It's kind of like, how did we operate? How did we manage to run the business efficiently and securely without having these things in place? So I think those are probably the big things in and around the space that I think we focus on when we're talking to customers. And the other one, I guess, is just automation. And people are sometimes a little bit fearful of the word, because it does imply robotics. It does imply that they're not going to be required anymore. But really, it's about using technology in a way that enhances what you do. And someone put it to me the other day, which was quite interesting, like, if you know the best tools are out there in the marketplace and you're not using them, and your job is to manage risk or to manage reputation or to ensure that your company is efficient, if you're not using the best tools that are out there, then you could argue you're not really doing your job properly, because you're relying on, human intervention. You're relying on, us as humans are fallible, and the tools that we use should be able to enhance what we do and help us do our jobs better, and also free us up to do the real work, do the exciting work, do the strategic work, and do the work that can only be done by humans, and leave the technology to mop up and to do the grunt work, frankly, that's repetitive and easy to make mistakes.
Yeah, I love that. I know one of our customers, I think it was Gordon Food Service, just did interview with law.com, and they said in there, by adding automation in, it wasn't that they eliminated jobs. It was that they were then able to focus on the strategic things that really mattered for their business. And we're, doing less of the mundane work. It was automating, things that really were taking them away from what they really wanted to be focusing on from a productivity perspective. And one of
Yeah.
our customers, which is a little more specific to healthcare and pharmaceutical, Sanofi has shared with us that, I mean, they're very large, and they had like 60 contract systems across, I think it was like 170 different countries. I mean, gigantic company. And when you start talking on that scale, being able to put everything into one system and pull those insights out of your single repository of all your contracts, then you can really start seeing some huge efficiency gains. And I know they were able to reduce their contract types down by like half. And I think, really just be able to get visibility deeper into those contracts, because you're talking about the insights. Contracts are becoming like a really a data point for where you can find a lot of the details about how your business is operating and make decisions. And so we're seeing more and more companies really start to use them as a way to get more intelligence and make better decisions. So
And I think that's contracts are so important. Particularly if you take a sector like pharma or healthcare, where, let's just say, you designed a new product, it's got a new special molecule in it. The value of that patent, if you like, that invention, might be 10, 15 years, and therefore the importance of protecting that asset in a contract when you're then licensing it, say, to another provider or a manufacturer, is absolutely key. And so getting to that negotiation is really, really important, right? Because you might end up arguing over whether it's worth $100 million or $2 billion. And it's important, therefore, that you don't waste time on all of the terms and all of the contractual backward and forward that, frankly, is pretty standard, right? I think if you go back and look at the agreements you've got, and you look at the red line, and you look at where you concede, and you look at the terms in your standard way of doing things that other sides never agree to, then sometimes you need to sit down and go, have we got this right? Is the process right? Is the playbook fit for purpose? And if it is, and once you've simplified that and made it elegant, made it so that it's easy to understand, it's easy to read, and for the opposing side, if you like, that you're able to do business quickly on some of those aspects and move those to one side. And what I think is coming in the future is clearly that will be an operation that could be partly automated. In other words, you'd be able to read incoming paper, or similarly, the other side would be able to read your paper, and you'd quite quickly be able to go, okay, most of that we're fine with, right? Now let's focus on the deal. Let's focus on the bit where we need to negotiate hard, because this is the really important stuff. And that speeds up. I mean, look at what's happened in the last, even the last few weeks around the vaccine. People were kind of going, how can you possibly develop a vaccine in such a quick time? But actually, when you talk to the people who design vaccines, what sped it up this time is the ability to get large cohorts of people to actually be the guinea pigs for the vaccine. Decisions have been made quickly. Regulators have made their decisions quickly. The finance has been in place quickly. And there's been clearly an appetite globally to find a solution. Often that isn't the case in pharma and healthcare. Sometimes it can take 10 years, not because it wasn't possible, but because the ingredients to make that happen quickly, there are barriers and there are drop-off points and there are delays. And those delays are often corporate in that, somebody might move position, somebody might leave the company, and you finance director may come in and make a decision that the risk is too great. Shareholders might get involved because actually current performance is insisting that you need to spend more money on R&D or less money on R&D. I was talking to a friend of mine who works in pharma over here in Europe, and he was saying, and I won't mention the names, but he was saying there was a pretty big company out there, and for a period of time, they were struggling a little. And actually, the legal function, through arguing for the rights of the patents that they had, were generating more income than the R&D department. Now that just demonstrates, doesn't it, that once you really get on it and you really know what you have and you understand the rights and the obligations and the terms within your contract, then it must be incumbent on you as a function to go out and protect those. And in this very complex, fast-moving, international, multi-territory world that we're operating in different languages, that's tough. That's tough to do with a spreadsheet. And it's tough to do when you're relying on the corporate memory being inside the heads of your best people who are stressed and busy. And guess what? Sometimes they leave. So if you don't systemize this stuff now, then you're building up potential problems or just not generating the value the company really deserves.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting because we count among our customers Regeneron and Sanofi and Johnson and Johnson and companies that are working on these vaccines right now around COVID-19. And I mean, the speed at which they're having to work and is like nothing they've ever seen. And the amount of collaboration that's having to happen. I mean, a lot of them are collaborating with their competitors. They're collaborating across countries, like you were saying. And all of that is governed by contracts. I mean, and so we've had many conversations recently with those customers on what can we do to better support you, how can we help those contracts really come to fruition quickly. And even last year, before COVID hit, we had done a survey of a number of these pharmaceutical companies, and I think something like 73% said that like contracting and administrative delays were causing delays in the sales cycle. And so you think it's the R&D, they have to solve the vaccine problem, but there's another big problem on the side is, can we get all the contracts in place? Can we manage logistically coordinating amongst all the different people and stakeholders involved in this development? And that's a huge effort from an administration perspective, where contracts are really playing a huge role and people forget about that. So I couldn't agree with you more.
I think that's right. I mean, I came from a retail background, and 2 or 3 days sales is a trend in that environment. Strategy is kind of like one day to the next. And and therefore any delay. Let's say you're trying to open a new store, or let's say you're trying to get licensed so that you can open and operate by selling alcohol within your grocery department,
Mhm.
these are things that are hardwired into the payback of a store opening.
Yeah.
And there were, we've had countless examples over the years where getting that license approved through a contractual agreement and the regulatory aspects, if that
Mhm.
was delayed, it really knocked everything back. And that's a pretty tough environment. I think the other thing that I think technology is beginning to help legal teams, because most in-house legal teams are maxed out, right? It's not like they've got time of the day where they're kind of twiddling their thumbs thinking, maybe I should do a crossword, right? So people are really, really busy, and therefore you have to make decisions about what you're not going to do. And
Mhm.
one of the things I think big pharma companies probably struggle with is that flip from, and I'll put a retail example on so I don't name names in pharma.
Mhm.
The kind of Walmart dealing with Procter and Gamble is one dynamic.
Mhm.
Dealing with the little farm producer
Yeah.
who perhaps only bakes cakes and delivers to one, that relationship couldn't be further apart. And yet,
Mhm.
typically, when companies are maxed out or they don't have the ability to flex through automation or through technology, they're going to treat everybody as if it's the same size company,
Mm.
same type of terms,
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
expectations. And yet, that's unrealistic. And the
Mhm.
danger, of course, is you're not doing a great, negotiation at either end, actually.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
actually being able to gear change and shift by
Mhm.
picking up a lot of that stuff and being able to tag and identify, hang on a moment, this is a different type of relationship here. So of course we've got standard terms, but we actually need more human intervention on this one to guide it through the organization than we necessarily do on the other one. And I think that's where it's really, really interesting for a sector like healthcare, where you really can't treat every contract as if it's one thing. And of
Mhm.
course, you're also operating on different paper, right? So
Right.
sometimes you're, we used to know if you're dealing with Facebook, it's their paper, and and if you're the drink supply down the road, it's our paper all day long. And being able to use systems that allow you to say, okay, well, let's just bring in and have a look at automatically. We cannot accept that term. That is
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
that we will never negotiate on. That process can happen automatically these days. So even before you've kind of pincered through into the legal team, they've already received a notification that just says, you're going to have to remove that.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
we're not even going to get to first base.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I mean, we talked a lot about the challenges, and I think we touched upon here, but spoke a lot about automation, kind of having a playbook. Is that where you think kind of the future of healthcare is going?
I think there's going to come a time, and we're probably talking 5 years out from here.
Mhm.
We do a lot of work, and I know you guys at Icertis do with the World Commerce and
Mhm.
Contracting guys,
Mhm.
IACCM for
Mhm.
those of us who've known them for a little while. And
Mhm.
one of the things that we've been exploring with them, looking sort of forward, say 5 years, is just how the future of contracting, where it might go to, and how systems will have to be inevitably interoperability.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether or not I'm on one CLM platform and you're on a different one, data is going to need to flow, and it's going to have the security of blockchain so that you know the integrity of the data that's moving around. But that interoperability, that ability for things to move together and talk together, is likely to come in the future. The other thing that we think might also happen is that as more and more organizations adopt, we'd call it kind of balanced negotiation, fair negotiation, where you're coming into the conversation with the other side on the basis that this should be a balanced conversation. And therefore, a lot of the terms that are in there, if they're standardized and they're recognized, you could almost have a kite mark, if you like, a stamp of approval from WC&C that says these are the right terms for intellectual property, as an example. Right now,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean you're not going to get into discussion in certain sectors, and I'm pretty sure in pharma you're going to want to
Some
ask me
standardized terms. Yeah.
who's got the IP. But on things like packaging or on things like trademarking, there might be some things there that are standardized, and that's your playbook, your
Mhm.
shared playbook. That
Mhm.
could allow for a lot of that element to be automated and actually from system to system.
Mhm.
And I think that that's important because again, that will speed things up. It's based on a degree of fairness and equity, an equity, if you like. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that one side doesn't have a better negotiation over the other, but it does mean that some of those terms can be agreed without the need for everyone to sit around the table and start. And I think the thing that strikes me is we've been doing this for some time. Like contracting's not new; it's as old as man is. you know, is that first exchange in the first ever marketplace.
Mhm.
So the idea that we should start from scratch each time we begin just seems absolutely bonkers.
Oh, I totally agree. And, I mean, probably one of the biggest benefits is just that simple idea of having your standard clause library, your standard templates that everyone is starting with. So there's not a bunch of maverick random contracts out there. And then, specifically for the healthcare industry with all the legal requirements and how often they're changing, being able to just sort of mass amend as a new, regulatory requirement comes up, being able to mass amend your contracts across the board. So again, they're fully standardized and you don't have some that are compliant and some that aren't. I think is going to be really, really critical going forward.
I think that's a really interesting point because whether or not it's here in Europe, we're facing into Brexit, so
Mhm. Yeah.
inevitably you've got the UK coming out of the trading bloc of the European Union. That is going to change an awful lot of regulation. Now, it might be even through the transition period that actually in the main things aren't changing, but
Mhm.
contractually an awful lot has got to change. Things are being rewritten into English law, for example, from European law.
Yeah.
Now, when that happens now, this is going to be a huge amount of, you know, there's going to be a bump in the road as we reach, the new year. And the implications of that still aren't clear because trade deals may or may not be done. UK might now do a separate trade deal with, the US as an example.
Yeah.
Not being able to automate that, not being able to see at the touch of a button, where is like a term like force majeure, which, many people had never heard of the phrase force majeure until right? And
Yeah.
suddenly everyone's like, have we got force majeure in our contract base? Not being able to just press a button and go, here are all of the agreements. But actually, when we look at those agreements, can we actually enforce it? Is it
Right.
really fair to enforce it? So I
Mhm.
think, it's silly for us to think that there won't be another, bump in the road. And
Mhm.
therefore, what we would encourage, corporates to be thinking about and in-house legal teams to be thinking about is if not now, when?
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
it's always going to be challenging, changing
Mhm.
from the system you use, or even, and we were on a call this week with a company, and they
Mhm.
were almost embarrassed to admit that a lot of the information they store is on a spreadsheet here and a spreadsheet there, and those
Yeah.
spreadsheets don't really talk to one another, and somebody has to go and have a look up to see whether or not, and then that generates a letter. But
Mhm.
they're not alone. And I think the thing that surprises me, the more that you talk to people and they admit where they're at,
Mhm.
actually there's a lot of large organizations out there who are yet to go on the journey. And I guess I'd encourage them, if not now, then when? And
Mhm.
actually by starting even discussing going on the journey, what you start to do is map out where you are and where the biggest wins are today. And I think that's important because when you start any of these change programs, you've got to get some early wins. You've got to get
Mhm.
some things under your belt that
Mhm.
people in the business start to go, wow, that's just made my life a bit easier. That
Yeah.
saved me a little bit of time. That was quicker than going to the legal team and asking for it. I just self-served on the company app. I did it on the
Mhm.
iPhone.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's those little use cases then that become quite contagious in an organization. And
Mhm.
people start to talk positively then about this thing. And
Yeah.
dare I say it, legal start to win friends, which is like
Rare. I mean, that's
that's
rare.
rare. Normally
It
you're
can
in
happen.
trouble.
It can happen.
It's like going to see the headmaster when legal tell you to come down.
It's true. Yes. We're making legal your friend. That should be our new tagline. Something that- So is that our next question that we typically ask is sort of what is one contracting tip that you wish every person knew? Does that kind of lead into that or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the tip is, just try, just get going. Like
Mhm.
you'll never find the perfect time. I used to run a sales operation, and we needed to take out the technology we were using, and we needed to change the sales agency. There's never a good time in any one year to stop doing something when it's sales related. And
Hmm.
the colleague that was working on it with me said it was like doing open heart surgery on a treadmill. You had to
Yeah.
keep pacing forward, and you had to do keyhole surgery at the same time. But
Mhm.
there's never a perfect time, and if you're waiting for that space, that 3 months of your career where
Mhm.
everything's
Mhm.
just going to go on hold, it's unlikely. So therefore, you just need to do some great planning. You need to sit down with your teams and work out where's the biggest win. And it might be something as straightforward as automating your NDAs, right? It's
Yeah.
a document that's highly used, it's relatively standard. More often than not, companies are pretty okay about having an NDA from either side. The terms are relatively straightforward, and therefore you can build that document relatively in a quick order and get it into the business and get people using it and familiar with using technology now to generate their own contract. And even
Mhm.
that, being able to self-serve as a business user and not have to trouble the legal team or not have to fill in a form, when you realize you've filled in the form and then it spits out the contract and it's already gone to the other side and they've signed it and it's
Yeah.
stored, and now you don't have to worry about it. So it's not like we're not inputting data all day long. We're just writing the email, or we're picking the phone up, or we're looking online. If you can start to take some of that natural behavior that people are accustomed to, but narrow it into actually a system that allows them to get the thing that they really need to do the job they need to do, then I think you'll find the organization's resistance starts to evaporate. So, my one tip would really be
Mhm.
start today, start somewhere, and look for that early win, and that will be foundational then. Um, and then bring in the experts, right?
Yeah.
You're not the first company to do it. You're not the first general counsel to have to tackle this problem, and you're not going to be the last. So sometimes there's that slight fear of, I don't want to admit we've not gone on the journey yet. It's like
Mhm.
you're in good company.
Yeah.
Go to, Icertis, go to people who have been there and done that, and the case studies and the stories that they have will reassure you somebody else has, just like you, has been on this journey already, and they fell into some of the pitfalls that you don't need to fall into. So, there's some comfort in not always being the very first, but actually you do want to be in the pack. And
Mhm.
if you're not in the pack, this will start to become a commercial issue. This will start to become
Mhm.
a strategic imperative. So now's the time. Now's the time to get in, stay in the pack,
Yeah.
to take that first step.
Yeah, I love that. And I think people need to think when they're thinking about taking that first step and going into, an automated CLM type of system. It's not just the technology. It really is an opportunity to look at your contracting processes, bring in experts who deal with contracting every day and deal with legal every day, like Syke, and sit down and map out, what do you want your contracting process to be? What does the future look like? We know everything is there's always an opportunity for change, and implementing CLM is more than just bringing in technology. It's really looking at how could we do this process better as a company, and we do recommend working with companies like Syke that have that experience and are able to bring that to the table to really guide people during that process. And just a humble brag here. I was thinking recently about, we're in the Deloitte 500 again this year, Fast 500 for growth. And I was thinking, what did our company do that we were able, in the middle of COVID and market disruption and everything crazy that's going on this year, still show so much growth? And I really was pondering it, and I think it's generally our senior leadership team, when it hit, and Samir in particular, our CEO, immediately said, this is an opportunity to innovate. And he started giving out innovation awards, even like, you know, we're going to look at this as an opportunity to grow and figure out new and different ways to do things and not feel hindered, but, kind of break the mold on stuff. And I think, that's true for contracting as well. I mean, it can be a huge area where people can really see some immediate ROI and value by kind of breaking the mold and breaking the way they were doing things in the past and looking at ways they can improve. And so,
I, I,
with that
I,
same idea, I was kind of curious. There's so much change happening in contracting right now. What do you think people would be surprised to kind of know about contracting?
So the stat that really stands out for me is one from the IACCM, which is that 9% of an organization's contract base, the value of that is leaking out the door through revenue leakage, which I just think is amazing, right? You think how hard it is to generate the income in the first place and then to convert that into profit. It's really, really tough. Even if your margins are healthy, that still means you've got to generate an awful lot of money to make that 9%. So imagine if somebody came to you and said, by pressing this button and gathering all of our things together, I can give you 9% more money next year to spend on R&D. I can give you 9% more money to spend on marketing. I can give you 9% more money to recruit the very best people for your team, because we need the very best people in our company to keep us one step ahead, right? That's hard. That would be really hard to go to your CFO and say, can we all have 9% more next year? I'm thinking, no. So it makes my mind boggle that organizations, and that's an average number, right? Organizations are sat on all of their agreements, and there'll be penalties that they're entitled to. There'll be changes in terms and volume measures and trips that mean they can go to the other side and say, based on the agreement we have, you've triggered a certain payment and we're owed that money. And all you're doing really is looking at the money in the door versus the agreement that you signed up to in good faith with the other side, right? So it's not like you're going after things that you're not entitled to. This isn't kind of debt collectors knocking on some poor person's door because they haven't been able to pay their bill. This is big companies who have contracted together on the basis of doing a deal, and you're just going back and getting what you're entitled to. So I just think that number for me is reason enough, if nothing else. If it isn't, you don't want technology because you want to go home and sleep well at night, or you want to be able to stop doing all that repetitive, boring stuff over and over again and focus on the real job of being a lawyer, as an example, really giving strategic general counsel advice to your organization, then look at it from a revenue perspective. There is money that is leaking out the door every single day, and therefore you must get a handle on it, and you must start to automate and build proper contract lifecycle management, not just the signature at the end, not just building an automated document at the start, really managing that entire universe so that you can extract the most amount of value out of it, but also manage risk. Manage where the risk is. And the risk sometimes comes from not really understanding where the work comes, how often it comes in, where the peaks and troughs are. And how many companies have to pick up the phone to their panel of external law firms to get them out of a moment in time where the workload has come in, and then a pandemic lands, and then something else happens. And we've all been in those organizations where you just think nothing else can go wrong this week, and then something else happens.
That's right.
So being able to see those kind of peaks and troughs in your work enables you to manage to that, and enables you to plan for that, and ultimately means that you become a much more efficient part of the business.
Yeah, and I love that revenue stat. It's mind-boggling, but having seen contracting in a lot of companies now, you can see where there's just huge opportunities for revenue growth from that. And on the flip side of that, I think it was Aberdeen put out a stat recently about costs and the administrative burden of managing contracts. And I think they said something like, by implementing automation of contracts, you could reduce your administrative costs by 25 to 30%. And so in addition to boosting your revenues, there's also, especially for the healthcare industry, where I think there might be more administration than almost any other industry out there, a huge opportunity for cost savings as well. And so, the ROI on contract automation is really, really high, and really, I agree with you, almost surprising at how much impact it can make to your bottom line. So I'm going to shift gears a little. I've really enjoyed talking with you about contracting, but I'd like to talk a little bit about you. So we asked you what you would be surprised to know about contracting. What would the audience be surprised to know about you, Dom?
Well, that's a very good question. One of the things that, as I said at the start, I'm not a lawyer, right? So I consider myself to be like a complete layperson when it comes to this stuff. You
Mm-hmm.
know, when I was at university, I did a degree in public relations, or as my dad used to tell people, a degree in BS, which is not, you know, he's a professor of chemistry, right? So, you know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, but what I've found that's been really interesting is that ultimately, you know, if you've ever read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
amazing to me how many parts of business life, whether it's retail, whether it's public relations, social media that I used to be involved in, or now in legal and contracting, at first they all seem so different and so disparate. And, you know, I thought, what do I know about the law? What do I know about
Mm-hmm.
contracts? But the more I get to know it and the more I understand it, the more I realize fundamentally it's about people, right? And it's about how people communicate. And if you can help, because it's almost like having Mickey Mouse ears, the way people communicate, is what somebody says and what somebody hears are very different. And
Mm-hmm.
even in the world that we operate in, it's so easy to misunderstand, miscommunicate, for something to be misconstrued. And so the thing I love about this is just fundamentally, this is a people business. It's
Mm-hmm.
people communicating and doing, you know, good things, good work with one another, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore the technology is there to assist us. It's there to allow these conversations to be even more meaningful, rather than us all get kind of bogged down in
Yeah.
another contract, another contract.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you're thinking about that. I mean, this idea of facilitating, I mean, really a system for facilitating communication and collaboration across contracts to make that easier and connect people more. We don't often think of contracting like that, but I really, love that kind of concept and where you're going with that. It is about the people. It is about the people. So, last question for you: what inspires you, Dom?
What inspires me? I suppose, you know, fundamentally, I'm a problem solver. I love, you know, finding a way around something. I think the pandemic's been really interesting because, you know, it's been challenging for everybody, and we've all had to work from home. We've had to find new ways to do our jobs. And, you know, with the dog walking in and barking mid conversation, or the kids coming in from school, you know, a lot of us have been homeschooling the kids, haven't we, for part.
Yes.
So, you know, I think the thing that inspires me, I suppose, is just, you know, that creativity, that ability to, you know, with constraint comes great innovation. And I think, you know, you were describing how Icertis has grown and really developed in the last year in spite of the pandemic. And I think it's probably been the same for us. We've
Mm-hmm.
had a few bumps along the road, and certain projects haven't perhaps gone ahead as quickly as others because people have been concerned about investing. We're seeing that come through now. We're seeing that actually there was a lot of pent up demand from the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Mm-hmm.
also seen a lot of companies really, really innovate and kind of go, actually look at what is possible. You know, even things like Zoom and Teams, the
Yeah.
ability to actually have conversations without the need to travel. You know, we've not traveled nearly as much. Like, I've not been on a plane for coming up to a year now.
Mm-hmm.
I've not been on a
Mm-hmm.
train for a few months, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not to say getting back to do those things wouldn't be brilliant, and I look forward to the day that we can get back together
Yeah.
in conferences and meeting rooms, because there's something magical about that. But I think
Mm-hmm.
also what we've learned is that it's, you know, you can be creative, and those constraints force you to think of how to do things differently. And to me, that's really exciting. So I've learned how to do a podcast this year because, you know what? I'm sat at home. I bought the kit. Who
Yeah.
knew?
You and
You
me
know,
both. You and me
yeah,
both, Dom.
exactly. So it's like I've got a new skill out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, that's the thing that inspires me is getting up every day and thinking, okay, there's lots of challenges, there's lots of constraint, but, you know, what's the creative way to overcome that? And finding that fun and that innovation, I think that's the bit that I find really interesting. And the other thing I'd just say is, you know, seeing the light bulb go on in somebody else. You know, when you're
Mm-hmm.
having that coaching conversation, or you've just told them a story about something similar, and you just see that moment where the light bulb goes on and their eyes light up. For me, that is magic. I absolutely love that. I love seeing
Mm-hmm.
that inspiration flash across somebody's eyes,
Yeah.
and you just know they're just going to bounce out of that meeting room and go off and like change the world. And I think that's, yeah, that's exciting. And what better industry to be in than pharma and healthcare, where you literally are changing the world for the better.
Mhm.
This is going to be a year that will be written about for decades to come.
Mhm.
2020 will be in the history books as being the first serious global pandemic in the modern era.
Mhm.
And just how that changed commerce, how it changed social life, how it changed politics. There's huge reverberations, and yet
Mhm.
the industry has responded like unbelievably to
Right.
potentially get 4 or 5 vaccines that are going to work and going to enable us to get back to some semblance of normality, albeit it will never be the same again.
Yeah. Well, I have to say bravo to the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry for the amazing work they have done during this pandemic, just completely innovating and responding and accelerating all the things that they have to do to try to rapidly respond and hopefully get us past this point in time. And then bravo to you, Dom, for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I know our audience will as well. We encourage everybody to go and check out Syke.tech and learn more about your legal consultancy and ways that they can start automating CLM. And we also will post information here at the Icertis Healthcare Day website so people can learn more about your offerings. And thanks again for taking the time to be with us today, Dom. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.